My grandfather came here at the turn of the century to work in the seafood industry. He came over here from the island of Brač, Croatia, which is off the city of Split, on what we call the Dalmatian coast, like the dog, Dalmatia. His uncle had arrived in Biloxi about 3 years earlier. He arrived in New Orleans, jumped ship, came to Biloxi, and went to work in one of the seafood factories where the seafood industry was booming at the time. And one of the owners of the factory, Mr. Laz Lopez, noticed his work habits and said, "You're a great worker. I'd like to get more people like you." He said, "Well, I can arrange that." Called back for some of his nephews and cousins, and my grandfather was one of 4 people that came over here in 1903. From there, he worked in the factories, calling his wife, calling his cousins, and others came behind him to work in the seafood factory. And that's how the Croatians came to Biloxi as part of the booming seafood industry at the time. Europeans in general are big family people, large families. They stay close together for years, and they tend to gravitate around each other. And you could imagine at the turn of the century in South Mississippi, Catholics coming from a foreign country, there was protection and a little peace of mind by living in one community together and working together. And of course, the factory owners loved these people and took care of them and protected them. And they made their way up the ranks in the factories by operating the boats, eventually building the boats for the factory owners. Dalmatia is a seafaring community. It's a series of islands, and you have a lot of boat building, fishermen. We're all fishermen. So they had the trade, they had the knowledge, and they came here and incorporated it into the Mississippi booming seafood industry at the time. East Biloxi, the point, they call it Point Cadet, but the old guys say it's Point Caddy. And the caddy was a ball game that they used to play with a stick. And so it has nothing to do with the cadets or anything like that. It was a kid's game, but the name stuck. The factories were located down here. It was away from all the residential area of Biloxi. You had a lot of beautiful homes along Howard Avenue and Front Beach Biloxi mansions, Victorian mansions by the seafood industry owners. And there was a lot of money at the time, a lot of wealth down here in the seafood industry and the lumber industry, of course. The point was just that part of the town where the new arrivals lived, the French, Cajuns, the Croatians, the Poles, the Italians. And these neighborhoods stayed intact for many years until the first generation eventually died off, and the younger second generation moved on to more prosperous areas of Biloxi, I would say. The second generation, it was the goal of the first generation, my grandparents, to educate their children, make sure that they had a better life. They didn't want them working in the shrimping industry, working in the factories and hauling oysters. Oystering, my grandfather hauled a lot of oysters. My dad worked for my grandfather. He said it was the most back-breaking work he's ever done. It takes a really strong individual to go out in freezing cold weather and with the wind blowing and loading tons of oysters on top of a boat all day long for maybe $6 of pay, or $5 worth of pay. And it was hard work, but they made money. They worked their way up. Eventually, the Croatians that worked in the factories took over the factories, bought the factories from the original owners, expanded on it, and it evolved into quite prosperous businesses for a lot of the Croatian community. And of course, they hired a lot of the Croatian, their cousins, their relatives that would work in the industry, and they just wanted a better life for their children. And obviously it happened. A lot of fine people that have gone on and become doctors, lawyers, judges from the Croatian community. I'm old enough to remember the pre-Hurricane Camille Biloxi with all the old wooden factories from the turn of the century. Most of them were still there being used. All the old docks, the ways where they built the boats on the waterfront across from Deer Island. The old wooden hotels along Biloxi were still there. Beautiful homes along Front Beach Biloxi. Hurricane Camille radically changed the whole scene of the Biloxi waterfront and changed it forever. The new factories came in and downsized. The seafood industry started to lose its power at that time. The shrimp and oyster industry was starting to fall back because of actually the loss of resources and overproduction. overfishing, like all areas. So it was starting. It was on its decline at that time after Camille, anyway. But it's all gone now. There's nothing there except casino and hotels right now.